All right, so we're going to begin talking about chapter 6, and this is going to take us from the early Roman Republic, really all the way back to the first Latin-speaking peoples, and then we'll go as far ahead as about 476 to 500 A.D. When the Western Empire collapsed. Though the concept of Rome is still a really important concept in the modern era, and even politically, Rome didn't disappear entirely. Well, I mean, they're kind of still a thing because the Catholic Church is centered in Rome, and the Catholic Church still has an enormous amount of influence and is the largest property owner in the world. So they still do have a large political, spiritual influence around the world. Rome has always been an important piece of Western civilization. So, just
Eastern or Western?
this is when I say Western Civ, I'm talking about, say, everything west of Poland, if you're looking at a map. So particularly like Western Europe, the United States, South, North, Central America. Western civilization is not really a geographic area as much as an idea. Think of when we're talking like roots of Western Civ, I'm talking about like, okay, how did democracy evolve and transition around the world? What are elements of these places that have influenced us? And so I'm trying to pick places that have had particular influences on us. So when I'm talking Rome, it's the big purple one right in the middle of the lighter colored purple ones. The dark purple is obviously Rome, the Italian peninsula, and then the lighter purple is the Roman Empire at the height of their power. So the Roman world by their height. Okay, so why are these guys worth talking about? Just wanted to give you some examples of their legacy. Our legal system is set up very closely to what these guys designed. A form of government known as republicanism, not the political party, but the concept of republic in that we elect representatives who make decisions on our behalf. That's a Roman concept. A civil service system, meaning a large bureaucracy, an entire sector of the economy called a public sector, which is teachers, firefighters, police, anyone who works for the government is part of this civil service system. That's a Roman concept. They didn't invent it, but we have mirrored our civil service system closely on what these guys did. In terms of culture, a lot of their philosophies. Now, while Christianity began in what is today the modern state of Israel, Christianity spread as a result of the Roman Empire. Jesus' ministry was in Jerusalem primarily, around Judea, but because of a man named Paul, who was a Roman citizen, who traveled to Rome and who influenced people in that area, and then years later, because of an emperor called Constantine, who legalized Christianity, and then because of an emperor named Theodosius, who made it the official religion of the Roman Empire, Christianity went from being a small subsect of a small subsect to what it is today. So really, had there been no Rome, we wouldn't be talking about Christianity in the way that we do. So then finally, language. It's interesting to think that a people from a peninsula so small would have an influence on the language that we all use, whether it's English or Spanish or French or Portuguese or so many others known as Romance languages, really trace their origins back to these guys.
Is English a Romance language?
Yes, elements of it. So English is kind of a hodgepodge of some Romance languages, some Old Germanic, some elements of Norse. It's a bunch of different things. There's quite a bit of Greek in the English language, so and that's honestly any language. As languages evolve, we pick up pieces of other languages, and we use words that other cultures have made popular. And sure, yeah, or sus, or even weird slang words that you guys use that I haven't quite heard of yet. Those are words that get spread and used by other cultures. And that's just how language evolves. So, in terms of technology, concrete is a Roman invention. The use of concrete. The fact that they built large public buildings. These large public structures like the aqueducts that brought water from the mountains all the way into the cities and provided indoor plumbing without electricity. The things they built were brilliant. And they were the first to build interstate transportation networks. They built the first highways, the first paved roads.
Good for them.
And some of these are still being used today. So amazing stuff that these guys are famous for. And move on for time's sake. So the Roman Republic, and really we're just going to talk about the first section today, and we'll get through this over the course of the next week. But I just wanted to start by looking at the early Romans as they established a republic and as they grew powerful and eventually spread their influence around the world. And so where are they? Why is Italy such a big deal? Well, when you look at the Mediterranean, which is again Greek for middle of the world, what's in the middle of that? Italy is right. The Italian peninsula is smack dab in the middle of the Mediterranean, and it has a large coastline, giving them access to so many other peoples and cultures. You know, it's easy to get across the Mediterranean into North Africa. It's easy to go east and get into the Fertile Crescent. And they were even sending Roman ships through the Straits of Gibraltar up into what is today France and what is today Great Britain. So they're ideally located in a very strategic place. And the first peoples living there were a group called the Latins, which is what the language is named after. But there were a number of different peoples living there. So the Latins were one, there were the Greeks, there were the Etruscans, and they were all competing for control of this different region. And the oldest settlements in all of the Italian peninsula date back to about 1000 BCE. So they'd been there for quite some time. Now, detailed written records of the Romans date back to around 600 BCE. And this is about the time that the Etruscan kings established dominance on the Italian peninsula and began to rule and call this place Rome. So these kings really built the first cities and the first temples and public buildings. But they were eventually overthrown by the Romans. And the Romans, when they established dominance around the Italian peninsula, founded a system of government unique for its time called a republic, which is actually the same system of government that we have in the United States.
No man did more for Rome than the Etruscans.
Okay, so this is just an example of what a Roman forum would have looked like. And so these are Greek-inspired pillars, and large kind of public gathering place. Um, in fact, if you use any discussion forums, that's where the word comes from. It's from the Roman public gathering spaces. Now, while Rome established these democratic traditions, they were also made up of many different groups struggling for power. So the wealthy aristocracy in Rome were called the patricians, the wealthy, the ruling class. The common people were called the plebeians, or plebes. And then from amongst the poor, they would choose representatives, and these were called tribunes. And they were elected representatives who spoke on behalf of the common person. Rome's first system of law is called the 12 Tables, and if you ever look it up, a lot of our legal code is based on the 12 Tables. Yes, ma'am?
Can you go back to the last slide? I don't know what's going on.
Yeah. So the 12 Tables later became the basis of Roman law. The important things to remember about this law or system of laws is number one, all free citizens are entitled to equal protection under the law. They were the first dominant people to offer this type of equality. So all free citizens entitled to equal protection under the law. Now, of course, citizenship, who is that? You had to be adult, you had to be male, you had to own property.
And you have to be from the country, right?
In the Greek tradition, you had to be native Greek. I'm not sure with Rome because I don't think you had to be born there. I think you could be naturalized and still be a citizen. But another important fact to know about the 12 Tables or about the Roman law is it was made public. It was presented so everyone could see it and read it. So what did this government look like? Well, there was an executive branch. They didn't call it a president because, in fact, there were two of them. And these were called consuls. And one would direct the military, and one would direct the civilian government. So now we have one president who does both, but they had two consuls. We don't use that tradition anymore because before long there's going to be three consuls, and then before long they're going to start killing each other. So history has shown us that having three executives, not such a good idea. So we have one. And then there's a Senate. So there's an executive, the consuls. There is the Senate, the lawmaking body. But the Senate, meanwhile, was chosen from Rome's upper class. And they were not a democratic institution. So in the United States, we have a very similar system. We have a Senate. They're not entirely democratic because the Senate, there are 2 senators per state, regardless of the size. Though we do vote for them, we didn't vote for them until the 17th Amendment was passed. So when the United States was originally created, senators were not elected by the people. They were chosen from amongst the Senate, very much like the Roman system. Then meanwhile, there's a second house, the democratic assemblies, the tribunes. These are the folks who represent the common people, who make laws on behalf of the common people. Now occasionally, and this could be a consul, this could be a tribune, this could even be a general, occasionally people would rise up and become dictators. Julius Caesar is probably the most famous case. He arrived from conquest in Germany, we called it Germania back then, and Rome was in a state of civil war. Julius Caesar marched his army into the city, put down the civil war, and declared himself dictator. Only he declared himself dictator for life, and he didn't step down from those emergency powers, and they killed him for it. And we'll get to his story on another day, but yes, ma'am.
Oh, this might be a dumb question, but what exactly is a dictator?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of different words for it. So the Greeks use the word tyrant, just as someone who seizes power. The Romans actually did use the word dictator. And again, this is, it has such a negative connotation in today's usage. But sometimes these dictators would be chosen or appointed through a lawful process. And I'd say the best American example would be when a president declares a state of emergency. And so when a war is declared or a state of emergency is declared, that gives executives broad powers. Really awesome powers, like next to a dictatorship. So the understanding is that our presidents only get that level of power during an emergency to deal with the situation.
Did that happen during Corona, like the very early stages?
Yeah, so early stages of COVID, like spring 2020, a state of emergency was declared, and so that did give the president broad executive powers. So anyway, the Roman army. Now the Roman legions are also really neat and interesting to study. These were separate military units, 5,000 infantry supported through artillery and cavalry, a very well organized system with clear rules, clear training protocols, common uniforms, common weapons. They were the first to really have a standardized standing army, and they were an incredibly important element to Rome's rise to greatness. time.
It was getting good.
Okay. All right, so a bit of their history. So as the Romans defeated the Etruscans and established dominance, they had complete control of the Italian peninsula by about 265 BCE. But another unique part of Roman culture is that when they would conquer an area, they would treat their people justly. They would conquer a region, and then they would allow those people to become citizens. And so, yeah, Molly Claire was asking about, how do you become a citizen? Well, in the Greek tradition, you had to be native born, but this was so unique to Rome and so progressive and really revolutionary for their time, is they would extend citizenship more broadly. So, if you know the New Testament of the Christian Bible, the Apostle Paul was a born Jew in Judea, but he was also a Roman citizen. Why? Because the Romans had conquered Judea, and they would extend this citizenship to any conquered place. Yes, ma'am.
This is a little off topic. So, females cannot be citizens, right?
Right.
So, if they had birthed a child, would the child have to go through something to become a citizen?
No.
Or are they immediately a citizen if they are male?
That's a good. Well, it's adults, so they would have to reach a certain age to obtain
So, a
citizenship.
child is not a citizen.
A child? No, they wouldn't have any of these rights that we're talking about in terms of a vote. In terms of equal protection under the law, I would assume they would. I don't know off the top of my head.
So they wouldn't really protect a female if they were a male because they weren't citizens.
Even though females birth the males that they call citizens.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're still in a world that treats women differently than men. So, not.
Yes.
I mean, even today, but more in talking Roman history, they weren't. I don't think they were progressive in the sense of gender equality. Is maybe what you're getting at. Yeah, go ahead.
So if the laws were made for citizens and females and children aren't citizens, then does that mean that they could just go on murdering sprees and be fine?
No, I mean there were consequences. I guess the point is that there were different behavioral expectations for women than men, and I don't know them off the top of my head, but again, true gender equality, even by law, is a rather recent thing in today's world. Yes.
What do you call people that come from a different spot to come here and that are not citizens, but they come to see?
Immigrants?
Like they come here and become citizens?
No. No.
Tourists?
Tourists. Would the women and children be considered a tourist?
No, they would just be considered a resident, maybe. In the sense of citizen, when we're talking citizenship, in the sense of having a vote and choosing these representatives. Now, when it comes to equality before the law, I would imagine that that would also apply to women and children, but probably not in the same way.
That doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
They were idiots back then.
Without women, you wouldn't be able to
I
birth children.
I mean, I agree with you. I completely agree with you. But again, we're still talking a very patriarchal world that viewed women as second class, really, and that's not right. It's messed up. But that is the way that much of the world was. There are exceptions, and we're not going to get to them in this class. But the southern part of India is a place called Tamil. And Tamil, and they are and have always been a matriarchal people, meaning that the women ruled there. There's a few places like that. The Cherokee people are actually like that as well. Yes, ma'am.
Also, in the religion of Islam, women are actually put above men.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and we'll get to Islam in chapter 10, I believe. So it's coming up soon. All right. So, as Rome began to grow, they would extend the rights of citizenship, but they would also establish trade networks. In fact, by the time of Augustus, so by the time of Rome's first true emperor, the Roman people have expanded their influence and empire all around the Mediterranean. But their first major rival was a people known as the Carthaginians who lived in the northern part of Rome. So, if you've ever heard of the Punic Wars, I just always thought this was fascinating. Maybe you've heard of Hannibal and the war elephants. But again, these were stories I just grew up hearing and I always thought were amazing. So, Rome and Carthage fought a series of 3 different wars called the Punic Wars. And several, I'm just going to focus on some of the legacies of this. One of the coolest parts of the story was in the Second Punic War. The famous Carthaginian general Hannibal landed away from the Italian peninsula and had an army of elephants with him. And, in addition to his army, but he's most famous for having these war elephants with him, even though there weren't too many. But then he crossed the Alps, the mountains that divide Italy from the rest of Europe. And when he crossed the Alps with his army, most of the elephants died. Very few actually made it into the Italian peninsula. Many of his men died, but crossing the Alps with an army all those years ago was an incredible feat. But he did. He crossed, and he still, even with the diminishment, had an incredible army by the time he got to Rome and was entirely dominant. I mean, no one could face his army and win on a battlefield. And the Romans, even though they had established a rather large trading network and had conquered many different people, never stood a chance against Hannibal. And so the famous Roman general Scipio knew that he could not defeat the general Hannibal and his army. And so instead, he was the very first to at least write about this and develop the guerrilla tactics that he used. And he would use hit and run, and he would use ambush, and he would attack supply lines. He never faced Hannibal openly in the field. So, having never lost a battle, because of all these hit and run tactics and all these ambushes and all these little raids, the Carthaginian general was forced to leave. And in the Third Punic War, in the final one, the Romans eventually destroyed the city of Carthage. And it was said they were filled with hatred after all those years of warfare. They destroyed the city, they killed the people, and they sowed salt in the fields. They wanted to absolutely wipe these people off the map. Wow. And so, with the end of the Third Punic War, Rome destroyed the city. They killed the men. They made slaves of everyone else.
Hey.
No, go back.
Why did they hate them again?
That's not like 2
Um,
Go back.
Carthage was a great sea power, and Romans had never fought a single battle at sea.
And so the Romans, in order to fight a naval war, had to develop a navy. And they got a break early in this war when they found a Carthaginian warship that had accidentally washed up on the shore of the Italian coast after having been abandoned by its crew during a storm. And they closely studied the Carthaginian vessel. They took it apart, found out how it was built, and then built hundreds of exact replicas of this Carthaginian ship. So the Romans now had a fleet.
New to naval warfare, the Romans had to find a way to turn things to their advantage. They soon found the answer. Instead of bombarding from a distance, Roman soldiers boarded the enemy's ships using a specially designed plank called a corvus. In hand-to-hand combat, Roman legions were just as deadly as on land. It took 23 years of fighting, but the Romans won the First Punic War in 241 BC. Romans seized the rich islands of Sicily and Sardinia and forced the king of Carthage to sign a crushing treaty, giving the empire's entire treasury to Rome. It's said a young boy witnessed his people's humiliation that day. The son of a Carthaginian general looked on, bitterly, vowing revenge. The child's name was Hannibal. 2 decades after Carthage lost the First Punic War, Hannibal was now a soldier, the leader of his nation's military. He was 25 years old and already a great warrior. Fresh from the conquest of Spain, he reminded his troops of his promise to punish Rome.
Year after year you have fought with me and won. Steel your hearts to march forward, to halt only the walls of Rome.
But attacking Rome wouldn't be easy. No longer in control of the Mediterranean, Hannibal would have to make the journey by land, crossing the Alps with 40,000 men and 37 elephants. Autumn, 218 BC. Man and beast trudge for months over cruel terrain. Their serpentine parade stretches more than 15 miles. Hannibal's troops are professional soldiers, well-equipped and well-trained, and yet the long journey takes a grim toll. When they finally make it through the mountains, 1/3 of Hannibal's men are dead. Most of the horses and all but one of the elephants have perished, and yet the survivors march on. Even before the first battle, Romans see Hannibal as a potent threat.
They never had to face a fiercer or more warlike foe. Carthage had long been an enemy of Rome, and they were bringing with them countless Spaniards, already battle-hungry, and would soon be raising Gauls with their insatiable appetite for blood. War was coming, and it would be fought in Italy in defense of the walls of Rome. Living.
The Roman Senate raised 6 new legions, more than 30,000 men. The Second Punic War was begun. This time the deciding factor wouldn't be manpower, but strategy. Most Roman commanders were political appointees with little battlefield experience, no match for a military genius like Hannibal.
Hannibal had a spark. I mean, he had many things that made him a great leader. I mean, he knew how to motivate troops. He knew how to innovate on the battlefield. He knew how to make the optimum use of the tools at his command. But in addition to that, he had that spark. He had the ability to read an enemy and find that one maneuver that would cause the enemy to collapse.
In battle after battle, Hannibal humiliated the Roman legions. The most devastating defeat was the Battle of Cannae. Here, Hannibal, though badly outnumbered, managed to surround the Romans and slaughtered them. 50,000 Romans, more than half the entire Roman military, killed in the worst defeat Rome ever suffered. At last, Rome saw Hannibal for what he was, the first true threat to her survival. For 15 long years, the war against Hannibal dragged on, and large areas of southern Italy defected to him. Hannibal never lost a single battle, and many wondered how long it would be before he attacked the city of Rome.
It was widely expected, of course, that he would take the city, but Rome was heavily fortified. Hannibal seems to have not had proper siege equipment. No matter how many armies of the Romans and their allies Hannibal could defeat, the Romans were always able to raise new armies, to put new armies into the field. And ultimately, Hannibal failed to take the city.
And yet the tide didn't turn against Hannibal until the Senate called up a military leader in the same league with the legendary Carthaginian. Publius Cornelius Scipio had the cunning and the charisma to match the so-called scourge of Rome. The son of a general and a survivor of the Battle of Cannae, the young Scipio studied Hannibal's tactics closely. Then in 204 BC, rather than confront Hannibal in Italy, Scipio had a brilliant but risky plan, an end run. He sailed to Africa and invaded the empire of Carthage. Carthage was forced to respond, recalling Hannibal from his 17-year torment of Italy. It was the moment of truth. Scipio and Hannibal would fight a single battle to decide the Second Punic War, the Battle of Zama. The two armies gathered forces in the countryside of what is now central Tunisia. Outside the ancient city of Zama, Scipio confronted his arch-rival, Hannibal. It's believed the two men met face to face just before the ultimate battle in an attempt to make peace. Scipio refused Hannibal's terms, saying to his rival, "Prepare for war, since evidently you have found peace intolerable." The two sides were well matched, with about 34,000 men each, but there were crucial differences. Hannibal had been resupplied with 80 of his dreaded elephants, but Scipio had drilled his troops in new tactics for dealing with the great beasts. The Roman troops would form long corridors to funnel the charging elephants away from the front lines where they do the most damage. Scipio also had the support of thousands of local Numidian cavalry who defected from Hannibal. Renowned as the best cavalry in the world, the horsemen added to Scipio's edge. Scipio finally and soundly defeated Hannibal at Zama. Carthage was crippled. Carthage was forced to hand over all but 10 of her warships, all her elephants, and a treasure so great it would take 20 years to pay. The once great empire was impoverished and stripped of all power. Hannibal escaped from the Battle of Zama. For a time, he tried to revive his waning Carthage, but eventually fled into exile in Greece. And though the aging warrior no longer posed any threat, Rome still pursued him, determined to capture the famous scourge. Ultimately, Hannibal denied her the pleasure.
Let us free the Roman people of their long-standing anxiety, seeing that they find it tedious to wait for an old man's death. It is no magnificent victory to defeat a man unarmed and betrayed.
With that, Hannibal put a drink of poison to his lips and drained his cup. But even Hannibal's suicide was not victory enough. After so many years of war, Rome still saw Carthage as an enemy and could not abide her survival in any form. In 146 BC, Rome destroyed the African Empire once and for all in the final Punic War, slaughtering 500,000 people. The pearl of the Mediterranean is ground into dust. Carthage is no more. Rome now controlled the entire Mediterranean, along with parts of Spain, southern Gaul, and the Italian peninsula. At the same time, Rome's power was spreading eastward. In all, Roman armies held more than 250,000 square miles. In 3 centuries, a small backwater city had become a dominant world power. In the past 50 years alone, she more than tripled her domain. Her military was the most successful fighting force the world had ever known. No power on earth could truly threaten her, and every nation in her reach had reason to fear. But success wasn't all it's cracked up to be. More than a century after the wars against Carthage began, Rome was left drained, both financially and emotionally. War-weary Romans had lost hundreds of thousands of sons to bloody battles in faraway lands. Surviving soldiers had been fighting so long, they barely remembered their homes. One thing became clear. A non-professional citizen army was no longer adequate for an empire the size of Rome's. It would fall largely to one man to professionalize the Roman military, a general and politician named Gaius Marius. Marius saw the need for far-reaching changes in the structure of the Roman army. To be a soldier would now be a career in itself, not merely a sideline for landed citizens. Marius recruited even the poorest Romans into the legions and issued them standardized equipment, making them the best outfitted soldiers in the ancient world. Including weapons, a soldier carried at least 80 pounds on his back, earning troops of this era the nickname Marius's Mules. Rome's first true professional soldiers were even more fit and better disciplined than earlier armies. But the biggest change of all, this new class of warrior had a special relationship with its commander. When they became veterans, Marius would personally see to it that his men received a grant of land, often in recently conquered territories. In the end, this was more than a generous perk for poor soldiers with no farms to return to. In fact, it was revolutionary. Suddenly, a soldier's first loyalty was to the general who recruited him and took care of him in old age, and not to the state.
For the first time, the soldier looked to the general, not only for allegiance, but for pay, for retirement benefits, if you will. And then over time, then the army began to dominate the state rather than the state dominating the army. And that's the terrible legacy of Marius.
Powerful generals now controlled their own private armies. Soon, they would use them however they saw fit, even against Rome herself.